Regarding the world through Zen eyes. The depth, insights, wisdom, perspective, and scope of these podcasts cannot be overstated. I feel I grow with each one I hear. Each is a treasure. The topics are explored with humor, warmth, and accessibility. I highly recommend them. You'll be glad you tuned in. I sure am.
Welcome back to a late episode of the World Through Zen Eyes podcast. I'm Young Anson. I'm here with
Dr. Ruben Lambert.
And welcome back. I say late. Many things have been going on, and a fan mail request with the specter of Valentine's Day on the horizon. Let's maybe the next year's, because we kind of missed the boat on this one that passed. But nonetheless, with the specter of Valentine's Day on the horizon, a reflection on relationships would be engaging. Relationship of a romantic origin are as much a cause of suffering as they are of joy. This seems particularly the case in committed relationships over the course of time, as life circumstances and experiences put strain on couples. So often relationships grow strained and distant as the time moves on. What guidance does Zen offer for the maintaining relationships between couples through time? Many thanks for all wisdom you two share. Right. I think just go right in, I guess. I think one of the biggest difficulties is forgetting the very fundamental teachings of Zen. That is to say, for one, impermanence of things. And as frequently is the case with these slogans and these single word, so much meaning is either attached to it and not necessarily the right meaning, or simply they're taken at such a face value and become so hackneyed as a single statement, especially when the word is viewed within the day-to-day context. So impermanence, when people frequently hear the word impermanence, it becomes the end is near. You know, the permanence is not the thing of it, and so an end is something that the mind jumps to. So the thing is, and then we say the word, oh, but it's impermanent, and then immediately the mind conjures up death of it, or the end of it, or complete cessation of it. And at the same time, a loss of the thing as it was. And I think it's so much more beautiful of a concept, so much more beautiful of a principle, impermanence, that is. We've talked about it at some point, to some degree. There is instead of the decay of something, impermanence also includes an evolution,
Right,
a growth,
right?
a change, right? And this is where the trip ups come in, especially in relationships. There's an attempt or hope, perhaps, for the relationships to freeze in time.
Oh yeah. I mean, if I had a penny for every time I heard she or he is not the same person I married,
Right.
or she or he is not the same person I met,
Right.
I'd
And there's a
I'd be very wealthy.
so for one there is that pointing to the other as the only one who's subject to change, and being not the same as the one I've married. We forget that perhaps us two then are also in the same
Subject to
the
that
same
universal
thing.
law,
Right.
right?
Right, and there is some attempt to freeze the thing, and usually the freeze and the hopes and the wishes for the freeze are for a relationship to be frozen in that puppy love stages, in that what they call the honeymoon phase, right? I think it's called, which is the initial time in relationships when the people are discovering one another, and
Right. People hold on to that nostalgic phase,
right,
right?
Of,
Where it's
oh,
that
when
like
we were
Hallmark movie,
sure,
right?
yeah,
It's or that romantic movie, like let's just say The Notebook or whatever. Everyone wants to go back to that moment of the way things were, where every food that you ate together tasted sweeter, and every word that you said felt like silk on my chest. You know, but
yeah,
you know,
it
and
is
the freeze thing real fast. Like when I hear you say people trying to freeze, and I see this all the time, is it almost feels to me like a violation of the other person's human rights, because the concept sometimes feels like, oh, I wish they remained this way, and it's like now this person imposing an
encaged.
idea or a way of being and encaging that person, not realizing that you married a person who's a living, thinking, breathing human being who has a right to grow and change and expand the way that they think or the way that they believe over time.
Right.
And so
Evolve.
sometimes, yeah, this idea of just freezing and bringing things back, or I wish they never changed this or that about themselves, really sometimes comes off like something that you're imposing now onto that person.
Right. It is the we have to understand that initial phase to be a phase of discovery, and
Right.
of course one doesn't know the other person
Mm-hmm.
deeply and profoundly, and so then the mind then creates the
It's an illusion almost, right?
in the
Because
eye of the
it's
beholder
this fantasy
kind of thing.
who they are.
Right. And it is to be understood as a stage or a season in relationships. Relationships are like life itself. They're like an existence of anything itself.
Right.
Anything.
That you
And
come
so
in
the
contact with, that you
impermanence-
make an inyan or a karmic connection to, follows a certain cycle.
And then it alters its reality also. There's an intertwining. When you meet a person, you have been with the person for a brief period of time.
Right.
One thing is you only know very few things about them,
Yes.
although you imagine, the romantic, well, I feel like we've known each other forever kind of thing. So there's that element of
Let me just and then continue down that path. When I see a breakup very early in a relationship, let's say within the first 6 months to a year, where the person is in this romanticization or fantasizing phase of the relationship, or how they view the other person actually, those breakups tend to be very, very severe and intense. And what I've noticed, and I've said to people at the appropriate time, is that I don't think you're really suffering the loss of that person per se. You're suffering the loss of the idea of who that person was, because you really never got to know who they truly were. You just romanticized them and created this Prince Charming in your mind, which they might be or might not be. But I notice people suffer the idea more than the actual loss itself, or what could have become, these outcomes that never came to fruition.
Yeah, it is all subject to impermanence, all subject to change. That initial discovery is intriguing. There's intrigue. There's
Mhm.
it's perhaps like a good movie. What's going to happen next? What's
On the edge of your
there's
seat, waiting
unknown,
for
right? Some impulsive, compulsive, spontaneous going ons,
Mhm.
and there's a rush in that, and from the perspective of chemistry, there's a very different experience of love or initial relationships, chemically speaking, because of that unknown element. And then as the time progresses, the for the lack of a better word, jadedness perhaps comes in and changes. For one, simply the chemistry of the body and the chemistry of the experience of love.
right, because then you're no longer like, oh, what's going to happen next in this movie, and
Right.
you're just captivated
You've
by it. You're
watched
like,
it already.
I've seen this damn episode 5 million times. I already know what's going to
Right.
happen. I'm going to say A, B's going to happen. We're going to just
Right.
X, Y, and Z, right? Like,
And it's in the context of this. Again, it's understanding the changing phases and the seasons of relationships. There's the spring, the summer, the fall, and the winters of relationships, as they are with life, as they are with seasons. And to appreciate each season for what it has to offer, and to understand the impermanence in the sense of growth and change and development. There's something new always. I mean, we're in a winter again, but last winter wasn't like this winter
it
is.
was not.
So different snow, different everything. And so this wanting to hold on to a single phase of relationship and viewing it as spontaneous going-ons are bound to happen and can happen, hasn't ended in relationships. But also we have to consider the fact that people get into relationships, and the very face of it is this pursuit of this puppy love kind of thing, the romantic, spontaneous. But at the same time, people get into relationships because they want stability in life. They want somebody to be with, and the hope is that you will be with them until your last breath. And so on one hand, we have the desire for spontaneous, dramatic, unknown.
Yeah.
But then at the
The
same
rush.
time,
They want
right,
that rush.
right? But at the same time, we want the kind of stability
Yeah.
of consistency. So these two energies, in a sense, are at play.
It's almost like a fundamental. It's almost in line with some of the fundamental causes of why we just suffer in general, right? We try to manipulate reality. When the good things come, when I'm eating a delicious type of food, at the very last bite, you don't want it to go away, right?
Right.
Or when I'm in a financial bind, or when I'm sitting in traffic, or if I'm feeling some kind of ache and pain, then
Can't wait for that to
then
change.
you want that to go away right away, right? So it's like you're just in that same kind of mental manipulation of reality that's just not working out.
Yeah, it's some strange aloofness from the way things are, and the Zen teachings really are about the very fundamental. There isn't a lot, actually. There are very few fundamental points that on which the foundation of which grows up everything else. So the whole amalgamations and the whole reorganizations and the whole varieties of life experiences stand on very basic few legs, actually. And if we could understand those, everything moving upward from there is seen in a better light.
Sure.
And so everything's in state of impermanence. That's one thing. Understanding that our minds are fickle and move from one thing to the other. And when the mind produces within it a desire for a thing, it will unjustly negate everything else that is counter to what the desire produced in the mind wants. You having a cup of coffee, if there was no coffee and the mind fixated on, I need a cup of coffee, I want a cup of coffee, it must be a cup of coffee, every liquidy, drinkable thing is non-existent.
You'll suffer that
It's
because
thrown out. Do you want tea? No. Do you want water? No. Do you want juice? No. Do you want soda? No. Do you want wine? No. Do you want
it has to be this
hot chocolate? No. Do you want buttermilk? No. Do you want, I don't know, agar? No. None of these things will satisfy.
No.
Why? Because the mind fixated on wanting coffee, and so it's unjustly then throws everything else into the trash. Because it's not getting that one particular thing. And actually, wisdom is the ability to adjust to those kind of things. That's what wisdom is. It isn't so much then knowing multitude of things and saginess and no, it's knowing how to, when the mind has fixated or shrunk, to unshrink oneself, or simply to understand the changeability and impermanence of things and bob and weave with life as it goes on.
It will unbind you from the bulldozer that your ego can be at any given moment. Because what you were describing to me before, I just couldn't help to think, but this is also one of the root causes of many arguments in any kind of relationship, whether it's friendship or romantic, because there are a lot of tears and blood at the tip of the sword of, I just want you to understand this one point that I'm trying to make. My goodness.
Yeah.
And it's just, and then a person doesn't have the wisdom, because the mind will just shrink wrap itself around that one point.
No flexibility.
No flexibility whatsoever.
And so the flexibility is impermanence, and understanding it as such allows us to appreciate the evolution of life, evolution of experience, evolution of relationships. This is still PG-13, I guess, but one of our members used to have 2 dogs, and the 2 dogs were grown dogs. One was a female, she was the younger one, and there was an older German Shepherd, grandpa. And anytime the younger one was in heat, grandpa would, insist on pursuing her for the call of the wild, his real legs are giving out. He could barely walk. He could barely stand up. But like the old man in a nursing home, whistling at the younger nursing staff, and wanting to pursue the things that aren't his to pursue anymore. But the nature, the animalistic nature, still holds him.
Right.
And so there is a reason why the seasons of relationships change. If throughout the relationship a profound friendship is not established, meaningful conversations aren't established, and this doesn't mean the couple agrees on everything. That's
never the case.
That's not
practical anyway,
practical,
right?
or suitable.
No.
One ought to have disagreements, but the disagreements.
For that, you just talk to yourself in the mirror if you don't want anyone to disagree with you. But go
Right.
ahead. Yeah.
Well, the mirror's going to disagree with you because you want to look better
Certain
than
way.
the mirror says,
Right.
and you don't want to age, but the mirror says otherwise,
Mhm.
and so if throughout the relationships these intellectual, for the lack of a better word, then elements aren't established, when the physical, naturally speaking, the physical impermanence comes in, the relationship then can stagnate and become sort of stale on account of, well, now the sexual expression perhaps or the physical expression isn't satisfied. So there must be more that is built up through the passage of time within relationships. Conversations that aren't, and this is something that happens also because life dictates so much. So the conversations that begin to be established are simply administrative conversations.
Mhm.
If you got kids, who's getting the kids, who's picking the up, who's making this, who's taking them to this play date or this or that, and it becomes very administrative, as if the relationship becomes a professional relationship, right? It's a company, and the employees of the company are given tasks, and the tasks are completed, and the conversations evolve around these very practical elements of life, and the profound expression isn't given a platform, and then people can have meaningful conversations with one another, and so they turn to their friends, or and also that's frequently how affairs and extramarital relationships form, because somebody else seems to listen better, and because these extracurricular relationships haven't the pressures of the administrative elements of life. So apart, or in addition to the administrative day-to-day coexistence of a family or relationship, we have to remember to have conversations about things that aren't things that have sort of deadlines and must be done, and checklists and honey-do lists and
Right, because all that creates is more pressure and stress, right?
Well, and it's one topic, and if a relationship keeps on only existing within that singular dimension of what needs to be done, what hasn't been done, what we have to do, etc., and there's no leisurely, conversation
right.
or something other
It's
than.
almost like early on conversations were like this. It's summertime. We would get into the drop top convertible.
Right.
We'd
What
cruise
is
on the
life?
highway, looking
Yes.
at the trees and having a destination that we both agreed on would be whatever, the beach, super enjoyable and fun. And then flash forward 10 years, and now, you're on a back road, and as an Uber driver, simply making deliveries
Right.
nonstop. And then you only have this one form of communication, and you forget the other form of communication. And that can really cause a relationship to grow dry and stale
Right.
over time. And this takes acknowledgement and a lot of work to then kind of alter that and shift gears away from that, because you can be 100% consumed by the daily responsibilities
Sure.
of work and kids
Got to make a living.
and bills
Right.
and creating
daily
schedules
minutia.
and things like that. And then as you get older, you have doctor's appointments, and then you have this moment that I've been talking to a lot of people in a certain age range that we call the squeeze, where it's you have kids younger than you that need a lot of attention and support, and then your parents are growing elderly now, and then they need support also, and that's another additional stress on many people's plates in today's day and age, right? And
you know, I think
these are
in the
factors.
privacies of each individual person, some interests are maintained. You know, one person likes to read a certain book or what have you. I mean, at one point in time, if, you know, unless the relationship was entirely and wholly based on the physical attraction, then there was something limiting to begin with. And so that's going to take a lot more of doing to acknowledge the other elements of the person. But if because again, in that initial stages of relationship, the conversations aren't so much of, you know, they're not business interviews. I don't think, you know, it's like, where do you see yourself in 10 years, you know, in the corporate ladder of existence. The initial conversations are more human. You know, what do you think about this, and how do you feel about that, and, you know, where would you like to go on vacation, or what do you like to do when, you know, they're the questions pertaining to the personal interests of the person. They're questions pertaining to the viewpoints and the personal philosophies that a person has. They're questions pertaining to deep-seated desires and wants and wishes and dreams. And then once, you know, some of that information is acquired, and then the relationship moves into the next stage, and like you said, it becomes a organization, and it becomes administrative. You don't have the time for dreams or talking about dreams, because somebody's got to pick up the kids from school or what have you. And then so each stage of relationship has still drama, the very same drama, in a sense, that we seek in the early stages of relationship. You know, the uncertainty and the unknown, and some kind of a pressure and adrenaline rush. Like you said, come to the squeeze, and now you have to tend to the parents, and there's a lot of sometimes, though, the squeeze and the things of that nature become a source of a lot of mumbling and grumbling, because a person feels that there aren't, in a sense, fulfilled or being fulfilled on each individual level, never even mind the relationship, because now the pressure and the responsibility of children, so now the children are taking the time away, and now the pressure and responsibility of aging parents, now the parents are taking the time away. But the question is, the time away from what? These things are just complaints, largely, that I don't have the time to do what I want. And one could be asked, well, what do you want? And the energy of the want, the energy of the desire, is somehow disproportionate to what it actually is. Because they say, well, if you had, let's say you had, you know, you didn't have to do the kids. Somebody just came and picked up your kids and took care of them, and, you know, whatever. And then you didn't have the parents, and they were taking care of what, you know, the initial wants and desires. Like, I would just lay down and watch TV and you know, brain death, because this wheel of life and this sort of catch up, I would just catch up on rest and sleep, etc., etc. And COVID exposed the fallacy of these things for many people.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, because
how many times people say, all I need is time. Right. Yeah.
And COVID was like, here's go.
Endless
Here's
time. What did you get accomplished?
Right. And this isn't to say that people didn't pursue new hobbies or dive into the hobbies they already had, or some rich, deep, fulfilling pursuits weren't followed. But I think for many people, the things aren't thought about deeply anymore, and so the wants and desires become what the person would then say, just very simple. I just want to, I just want to have time to do whatever I want. Okay, what do you want?
Yeah.
And so as the relationships evolve, and then this is also the basis and the foundation, the dangerous foundation for the empty nest. After the squeeze
Comes, yes.
the empty nest, and it makes perfect sense if up until that point when the kids leave home, the relationship was reinforced only as a relationship of
Serving a purpose,
administrative,
serving a duty.
right, administrative.
Then when that
purposes.
purpose and that duty ceases,
Right,
then what are we here for?
and then people say, I don't feel like I even know my spouse anymore. Well, for one, it's hardly a surprise if one hasn't, over the course of the time, had, as they would say, haven't had the time to ask him or her what she would like to do or whatever it is. Everything has been reduced to administrative chores. So the deep wants of the hearts, people don't seem as if there's no luxury for these things. I don't have the luxury to be thinking about philosophical desires of the heart and the things that initially, in the initial stages of relationships, keep you up at night and you're talking for hours and hours about what? There's topics explored. They aren't reports. I want the report on what you want on my desk by tomorrow morning. They're not, like I said, these organization, this company, this business thing. They're conversations that go into the night because one is intrigued, or there's some growing, enriching disagreements, not fights, but simply, well, no, I don't think that's how it should be. Well, I think that's how, just kind of, what's your basis for your position? And there's enriching way to have a conversation on points of views that differ from one person to the other. And then, so when the time comes, of course, a person perhaps feels that they no longer know their spouse. But then again, taking into account the impermanence of all things, and that what they, at least on a surface, are desiring is how things used to be, and the used to be is in such a faraway place at the beginning of a relationship. Well, here you go. There's a person. If you haven't had the time because of chores and life, sapped all of your energies and time out of it, isn't this then kind of a second honeymoon to enjoy, get reacquainted with your spouse? I'm talking about the empty nest, time. Get reacquainted with one another. See what you've been up to for these, years that I only saw you in passing, and as we exchange book bags for the kids to go from this game to that recital or what have you. And so that's a kind of a season of relationship, and there's a time when the relationship, you mentioned sort of human rights and things, where relationships become about a friendship, and then the attempts or the disgruntledness about, the person has changed, or the attempts to freeze a person are a violation of that evolutionary, impermanent reality of life. And
Right,
so,
because I think, just to piggyback off of that, why do we have to go back to this idea of the friendship being an important foundation to build the relationship on? Is I think it goes back to some of the things you were referring to early on in the podcast, where certain terms get hackneyed, they get overused, and the true definition sort of gets, you have like weeds that overgrow on top of that. You know, it's like a nice stone house that you can no longer see the stone because of all of the ivy that has covered it, by persons or people's distortions or concepts of, for example, what my spouse means to me, or what a relationship means to me, or what love means to me. Because what kind of covers the pure foundation of all of those terms is this idea of greed. Like, I want this person to, because they're mine, therefore mine, you know, starts off, it seems like harmless, right? But then that just grows into a cancer that consumes you, because the ego comes in and then feels like I should control this person. You should agree with me. You should remain the same. You should do X, Y, and Z. Right. And so when you can zoom out a little bit and you think about, well, what about the friendship aspect? It makes things a little bit lighter, where it's like, okay, there could be this now lighter exchange. There are less, my tentacles are not wrapped around every aspect of what you're doing, because you can really look at someone with eyes of that are too intense and too sharp, like, and this becomes jokes too nowadays. There are a lot of comedians that talk about, right, like, yeah, when we first started out together, we loved each other, and then now every time I breathe,
right, you eat too loud,
you eat too loud, or whatever it
right?
is. Now you're just intensely hyper evaluating and hyper criticizing every moment, and it's like, whoa, chill out. Like, you zoom out a little bit, and then you can have an exchange and it not be so intense. And this is why we have to like revert back to this idea of a friendship, not to say that the relationship should become a friendship. We're saying like a friendship, so that it's like less intense and that person has space to express themselves, and you have space to express yourself. And you can kind of like have a seesaw type of thing going on, where you're enjoying yourself, right? You go up, I go down, you go up, I go down, versus, you know, things can be like this sometimes. Like, maybe if a relationship was like a playground, then we used to ride on the swing together. It was so enjoyable. A few years later, a person decides to, you know, I want to go on the slide right now and I want to stay on the swing. And then instead of saying to each other like, oh, okay, I used to like the swing, now I like the slide, let me go do the slide with you. If you were like, look at you enjoying the slide. He used to sit next to me and just ride on this swing, and we used to swing into the sunset, you know. So you just kind of like tarnish that moment, instead of, you know, again, zooming out and be like, okay, I like the swing now. You know, you want to do that, maybe we'll go on the slide a little bit. Come on over, hon, and do the slide. But no one wants to come over where you're like, look at you, you're always over there, you should be here with me. Now you're you know the human condition. Once you start ordering someone, they're like, I'm not going there, I like it here. They stand their ground, and then you're these simple moments essentially escalate to like World War III, right?
And they stand the ground. They stand groundless ground, because the ground they stand is entirely composed and created by simply the ephemeral thoughts in their mind. This is the most grounded, thoughts, most groundless ground there is on the face of the planet.
Essentially,
a person's perspective or view. But you know, you mentioned the egonessness of it and the greed. Yeah, there's an ownership element when you get a thing. So even the identification and the paradigm through which we look at relationships, that is my spouse, right? There's a my, which is an expression of a sort of ego possessiveness, and then we somehow imagine when one gets a car and one then decides, I'm gonna, you know, put different wheels on it and, you know, bling the license plate. it's mine, so now I get to decorate it. It's mine, so now I get to alter it and repaint the walls in my house, and I'm gonna add a deck and whatever. But human beings aren't like that, and that goes back to that violation of human rights. I've acquired, as an acquisition, that this is my spouse, and with it, the ego starts to work. Is it ever the case? And one of the ways to look at relationships is not as a relationship per se, and this is a little challenging maybe to present, but the idea of a doban. Doban is a friend on the path, right? The Buddha talks about that, so we are together serving a higher purpose in one another's life, kind of thing. Another way to look at it is instead of thinking this is my spouse, one could say, I am this person's spouse. I am theirs. I am their spouse. And it changes the paradigm from that person is here and their very existence is to satisfy my desires, my wants, to be the way I want them to be, and I get to remain unchanged, or if I decide to change, well, I change, and that's because I feel like changing, and then the other person being deprived of their right to change or not change or what have you. So if it's in this extreme of ownership and desire to alter the person to match one's own liking, then we need to swing the pendulum in the other direction, and the person perhaps ought to think of themselves as the being of service to the other.
Right.
And in that service to the other, perhaps that middle ground is established, because one isn't going to completely entirely throw themselves into a position of servitude, and that's not also what we're looking for, but to kind of come back to the central shared position. And the trick or the challenge perhaps in relationships is that the both sides have to be philosophically on the same page. That is to say, philosophically on the same page of what relationship and each individual role in the relationship we are trying to accomplish, we are trying to pursue. Like, you know your role and I know my role, in a sense. And that bridges that disconnect, because frequently there's a disconnect. If conversations aren't had, one cannot be expected to do or think or be or view things in the way that the other person expects them to do those things. But that's happens so often. So communication in relationship, obviously, this isn't any news to anybody, but communication as in any profound grasp of anything isn't accomplished at the initial onset of diving into it. I read a book, and I read the book, and how many things are missed. And so it's better to sprinkle into relationships in a habitual way, conversations and things that shape the foundation and the expectations of relationship, and that the parties arrive at a somewhat of a common ground understanding of what each person's expectations or roles, etc., are. In a sense of relationship is a long-term therapy session between the two people, and they're voicing their thing, and it's work. It's always work in progress, but life is work. And that's why if we think of the other person not only as a spouse, but also as a friend, but also even more so profoundly as a toban,
I like the idea of the doban.
you know, where what is in fact the use or the function of a relationship, but to help one another grow, and if doesn't necessarily have to be, but I think it ought to be, grow spiritually. One serving the other while the other serves them back, together going towards happiness, the profound happiness, not even the happiness that the other person can furnish upon one another, the spousal kind of thing. Oh, you do for me, I do for you. No, the together we are working towards each one of us to grow wiser, to suffer less, to reach enlightenment. We are reinforcing one another on our path. We are supporting one another on our path. But the path, there are dimensions of it. Hwamgyong, so frequently, I speak of the principle of the perfumation of worlds. And yeah, there's a physical dimension of relationship and the world of it. There's that friendship dimension and the world of it. There's the administrative, the responsibilities, and the together well-oiled machine working towards a common goal of less stress for the whole family unit, and therefore less stress individually. And I want you to reach enlightenment, and you want me to reach enlightenment, and together we can be there for one another. It's we talk about the temple, like let's say the Soshimsa Zen Center, the temple. That's one kind of a temple. Then the Sangha and the community of the temple are the people that tend to one another in a sense. But then there's also the society, and we ought to tend to one another and look out for one another. And of course, in the other direction of this sliding scale, the temple and the Sangha, the community of a family unit, and those members of the temple, of the home, working towards one another to try and bring each other closer to enlightenment. And I think when all these various dimensions are addressed in life, then there's a whole sort of state of homeostasis and a balance. It's as the sort of definitions of sickness in Oriental medicine. We've talked about this several times. There's something is lacking somewhere, so some energetic element isn't being provided. There is not enough of this or not enough of that. And so if all of these dimensions of life are tended to and nourished, the changeability of relationships, the seasons of relationships, that it isn't like it used to be, aren't problematic. They're actually fascinating. Because each stage, as each season, provides opportunities for different things. Spring does spring things that winter can't. But winter also does winter things that spring can't, and with all the other seasons. And if we could acknowledge those things, and you don't go into winter not having chopped sufficient wood to keep you warm through the winter, right? And so it's that kind of thing. It's little by little adding to the woodpile that could sustain us through the wintry phases of relationships.
Yeah. Yep. So I love the concept of the dobanda. I think that's a very nice way to frame it.
Yeah, life, the whole of it, is if we were to say the purpose of life is to grow towards enlightenment, towards freedom, the classroom of existence, the classroom of day-to-day, the courses we take. A relationship is a course you take. Your job is a course you take, and all those courses and all those things have things to offer, but we also have to understand that some credits transfer, some credits don't transfer. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Well, I think we're out of time anyway. Mm-hmm. So, hopefully, the listeners find some morsels of usable something.
Yeah.
Information, wisdom, you mustn't say. But until then, and until next episode, whenever that may be, we're making an attempt to get back on the horse.
Since it's the year of the horse.
Since it's the year of the horse, right. And so until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Yagan Sinim.
I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert from My Heart to Yours. And also, we really appreciate the listener feedback and any topics that you would like for us to further explore or to piggyback off of any existing episodes. Please send those in. We really appreciate those. And if you know someone out there who could really benefit from these conversations that we're having and the education and wisdom that we're spreading throughout the world, please share our podcast with them. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we should make it. We should make it. It's like we're not doing a podcast until y'all have a question.
All right.
Why should we do a podcast?
That would really be like the way that the sutras were.
Yeah, I have a sock in my hole, and I want everybody to. I'm going to talk about it then. Yeah. No, you have a question, bring it on.
Yeah.
Also, we are having a retreat, a one-day meditation retreat, a day-long meditation retreat, coming up in June. And we also have one scheduled for November. So June 13, November 14. I know November is sometime out, but mark your calendar, check the website.
Soshimsa.org.
Yep.
/ do you know, is it /retreat maybe?
/retreat, or, when you go to soshimsa.org, you see the tabs and all of that. So check that out. It's filling up daily. Yeah. So there's capacities, obviously, and so don't hesitate thinking that there's ample amount of time to get your reservation booked, because they're going to be gone. So better sooner than later, better safe than sorry. Until next time.
Mm-hmm.